I'm opening. We have an eye, sort of a nostril, 2 teeth. One of the teeth has a small cavity. Close call, folks, but I think we got here just in time.
Presented by Maria Menounos and Kevin Undergaro. This is Anatomy of a Movie. In-depth discussions and breakdowns of various movie titles. And now that you've seen the movie, let the dissection begin.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Popcorn Talk Network. Here we are doing Anatomy of a Movie, and of course, this soundtrack may not be as recognizable as other soundtracks, so might not reveal what movie we're 100% doing. That's why we're here as hosts to tell you we are doing a most violent year, and if you haven't already done so, subscribe to our iTunes, subscribe to our YouTube channel, all that good stuff. That way you get all the content, and it's free.
Free. I like free.
We like free.
Best
in this
price
day and
ever.
age. The oil in this movie was way too high, but we are free. And we have Demetri, Panos.
Hello, movie fans.
We have Marissa Serafini.
Hello, everybody.
And I, of course, am Phil Svitek. And at the end of this, you guys are going to answer this question. Was he a good guy or was he a bad guy?
Which guy?
Are we going to answer this now?
No, at the end.
Okay.
At the end, because your opinions might change.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
But no, that's what I'm trying to aim for. Because I feel like ultimately that's what this movie is about. Is kind of, it's, to me, I guess I'll start with my overall impressions, right?
Sure.
The trailer made it seem like this is a gangster movie. This is kind of typical of what we've seen, in the past. And it very much wasn't that. There wasn't that violence. There wasn't as much. Yes, there was crime and things like that, and there was things at stake, but they were not always as apparent as in other gangster movies.
Sure.
And the drama, was more kind of interpersonal rather than actual violence. And so I wasn't expecting it, but I rather enjoyed it quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I was expecting a lot of violence because it's implied in the actual movie title, and then watching it we see there isn't, and I wasn't upset with it. I was, like you said, Phil, more surprised, but that didn't bother me because it came from, once doing the research on this film, really understanding just the year 1981 in New York was the most violent year statistically for crime rates and whatnot in New York. So someone who's young like me, in my 20s, whatever, that demographic might not even understand that that's really where the violence came in, and that's why they had the name of the title. But watching it, and it's the afterthought, like, okay, it was pretty violent just the year. Maybe not physically, but just their overall, everything that happened.
Yeah. I think that this was a solid film. I'd done a little bit of reading prior to it, so I was sort of kind of expecting this slow boil, we'll call it. And I think it's a solid character piece. I really do. And it sort of it reminded me of another movie that had come out earlier in the year that was even smaller release. I think it's a little bit better than this one, called The Drop, that had Tom Hardy in it and James Gandolfini. Again, another gangster movie, limited on its violence, just very well told story, sort of kind of a slow burn. This one sort of kind of had the same type of pacing. I appreciated it. I really liked Oscar Isaacs. I think he's being sort of kind of underappreciated in an extent because, he seems to be being overshadowed by the very wonderful and talented Jessica Chastain. That was great. But this movie falls on Oscar Isaacs' shoulders for sure. The slow pace didn't necessarily bother me in its lack of violence, which is ironic to the title, and it was meant to be, actually, according to J.C. Chandor, and we can get into that a little later. But overall, I think that this is a solid film that is marred by where A24, the distributor, decided to release this movie. I think it was sort of kind of a mistake to release this right in the thrush of Academy Award movies. This probably would have befitted being released February, March, because I just think while it's a good movie, it can't compete with the onslaught, with the Birdmans and imitation games and the theory of everythings that are out there. I just don't think it can compete with those. I don't think enough people have seen it or are going to see it. So I think a bad release date sort of kind of hurt this movie. Even though it won the National Board of Review for like Best Picture, which shocked the hell out of me, not because it's a bad film. I just thought that at the time that it had won, I was like, who has seen this movie? Mm-hmm. And, I think more and more people are finding it, which is good, because it is solid. I just don't think it's up to the caliber of some of the nominations that we have out there today. So,
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of techniques and things like that used that make it very different. And I mean, you could point at what's the black and white movie, the silent picture from a couple of years ago.
The artist,
right?
Yeah.
And that's taking it to a full extreme.
Sure.
So I get that, there's but like a lot of the shots were very, very dark.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I don't know if that was just because I saw it in a movie theater that isn't pristine,
right,
for lack of a better term, but I felt it was also done deliberately. So yeah, what I liked about it was, to kick things off, is everyone spoke of the pacing, and I liked the pacing because it made you have to figure out things on your own. Mm-hmm. You don't know what the deal is that he's doing right up front.
Right.
You don't know how much he puts in, but he's going to lose it. Eventually you find out he's putting 40%. And so, as time goes by, the 60% is 1.5 million.
Right.
And all these different things. So you're very much made to come, the pieces are there. Right. You just have to pick them up when you get them.
Sure.
Yeah, and absolutely. I personally had a problem with the pacing because if you're going to compare it to like other gangster films or crime films or whatever, it's not as fast paced as those films are. A lot happens and it's usually all at once, back to back to back scenes. It's like, and then also to your point, for the storytelling, I did like the unconventional way. It was like, the further you get into the film, you learn more details, and then you could put it together and piece it together and figure out the puzzle. But because it was so slow, for a lack of better terms, it's like, okay, 5 minutes happens, nothing happens, and then like 10 minutes happens, you get a little piece, and then another 10 minutes. It's like you have to keep watching to understand everything. And me, I really like everything kind of upfront, and like I do enjoy scenes that have big expositions and whatnot, and this film didn't have that. But it's not that it was bad, it was just that it's so slow and people might just lose interest, or it's like, all right, you could have told me that 30 minutes ago.
Well, I sort of disagree with you on the fact that I think that this movie is a slow burn because it is character driven. We are with this Abel character, and it's about him trying. It's at its core, this movie, outside of being a gangster movie, it's a transaction. This movie is a transaction, and how this transaction comes about, and how, because it being the most violent year and the corruption in New York City is affecting our lead character and getting this transaction done, which will hopefully make him a better man. And he's trying to stick to doing things the right way. So I liked the slow burn. There were two things that were fascinating to me. Number one, the character, his relationship with his wife, his business relationship with everybody else. The other thing I liked was it brought me into the world of something that I'm a little bit familiar with because I grew up with it, was the oil trucking industry for heating houses, apartments, whatever it may be. In the town of Peabody that I grew up in, to this day, we still get oil deliveries for heat. And it made me think, going, God, I wonder if in the 70s, 80s, this kind of crap was going on between the competing oiling businesses that were trying to grab your business, because there were a couple. And so I just found that fascinating because it hadn't been anything explored, to my knowledge, in the movie world. And then I started to think, geez, how does somebody in California, or maybe even Arizona, someplace in a much warmer climate like that, I don't see oil trucks here delivering to houses. I could be wrong, but I mean, does anybody understand the importance of oil for heating, especially in the winter?
But I think, the nice part is you don't have to, right?
Right.
You have Albert Brooks' character kind of, you get the inciting incident right off the top, but you don't know what it is. That's the irony, right? So even though you started the movie off, you get it. And on one quick thing too, unlike I feel like gangster movies, you would see a lot more of the violence there. We just always hear how it's affecting him, right?
Yes.
And so by using that, you see that it is important to him because of how it is affecting him. And there's that great conversation of like, why do you want this?
Right.
And what do you mean? I don't understand your question. And he never really fully answers it. But it's interestingly enough because by the way he acts it and the way he doesn't answer it, it answers it enough. Like he obviously this means a lot to him, and I don't think yes, he's trying to be a good man and all these different things, and I think ultimately, like I said, we'll come to a conclusion on that, but. At the very least, he does try, and he says all the right things. And unlike other gangsters, he does show signs of weakness and isn't afraid to admit it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I think another thing that kind of aided to the on top of the lack of the slow pacing was that the lack of proper introductions of characters. Because every time Abel goes to someone new, we don't officially get their name right up front, or like what their job position is and how they're related. Is it a personal relationship? Is it a business relationship? And so also not only is the audience just trying to figure out the story, they're trying to figure out the characters and how they play into the story. So there is just like a lack of constantly trying to figure out what the heck is going on. And I think that also just helped me watching the movie I had to slowly understand, but I kind of wanted some of that information, like, okay, now I understand who that person is, how they play into this.
Yeah. But I think it's a smart play if you again, it's not for the masses, but it's a smart play in that as slow as it is, this is going to keep you active.
Yeah, and it keeps you, and look, I paid attention. It had me I paid attention, and I don't know if you will agree with me on this point regarding this. So, regardless of the fact that it's called The Most Violent Year, and there is very little violence to be had in this film, but yet from beginning to end there was always the threat of violence that could have happened in any one particular scene. Things could have gone awry. There was the threat of violence going on, which actually, coupled with the pacing that had it actually sort of kind of kept me on edge. It kept me on to pay attention. Like, is something going to happen in this scene? Will somebody get shot or killed, or what is going on here? And with that too, coupled again with that slow burning pace, that kept me occupied and kept my attention going for the 2 hours and 5 minutes.
So let's talk about this isn't the most violent scene. I mean, depending on how you describe and define violence, but it's right in the middle, right? Our boy Julian, right? And so much weight got put on him as this movie went on in terms of his role in this. And we'll talk about the ending, absolutely. But, he's, as it's told, hey, it's going to be a routine route. Just go, you're stronger because you're doing it. And that whole pep talk, and he wants to be exactly like him. He wants to do right. And here he is, first time back. And then it's the hardest thing ever, right? It's like when you get in a car crash, the last thing you want to do is drive a car, and when the first time you're driving it, it's going to feel scary as can be.
Yeah, and I think that we should sort of preface, even for our people who've seen this, Julian was a person where close to the top of the movie, he was driving his truck, and his truck gets hijacked, and he gets beat up badly, so much that he has to be put into the hospital. So he sort of kind of wants to get out of the driving gig, and then he's like, no, I like you just where you are. You're really great at this. And in the meantime, there's a whole thing with the unions sort of kind of they want their truck drivers to arm themselves. And there's the thing going back and forth with that. And it comes down to a decision, like, we're not going to argue, no, where standard says, or not standard. Abel says no guns, whatever. And he pep talks Julian. It was great pep talk. Again, just going back to his performance Like, I bought into what he was saying.
Yeah.
And then Julian goes back out, same simple route, and then what happens?
I mean, and it's not a typical shootout.
No.
It's very much, it stretches out time. And one of the more interesting parts of it was the disconnect between them. Like, it was just strictly business. Mm-hmm. But here, in the most, it's business, but lives are at stake.
Yeah, and the bad guys, the quote-unquote bad guys who are about to attempt to hijack the truck, when he starts shooting at them, they're like going, oh, come on, really? Yeah. And they don't even know what the hell, like, he's shooting at us. What do? Well, we got to shoot back. And it's crazy. It was a great scene.
That's what I actually enjoyed about this particular scene because of the twists in characters. This is where the irony comes from. Like, the guy shooting at each other, you think that they're bad. I mean, you're not rooting for them. You think they're the enemy. And then literally when the police come, they're like, run. They're trying to save each other's lives. And I was like, okay, I like that twist of character turns and whatnot. So yes, again, to your point, it's all business. But I mean, I liked that aspect. It's
right.
like, okay, not everyone is as bad as it seems.
Yeah.
So someone who we think is bad on like doing the business and might just be a good person trying to fend for themselves or whatever. So I did like that.
Yeah, no, it's a great scene, and the irony in it, like the two quote unquote bad guys, or the hijackers, I'll call them. They're running by where they could have just shot him as they're running by, but they're like going, "What are you sticking around for? Run!" And then there was a great scene when they go into that bridge stairwell. And I'm thinking, okay, they're waiting in the dark for him to come. They're going to shoot him. Nope. They're like going, dude, they're like, drop your gun. Like, don't you know? It's like, dude, like, all we wanted was the truck. Like, look what you did. You're an idiot. But you understand our driver's position. He didn't want to get beat up again. He didn't want to be put into the hospital again. It was a pretty terrifying thing. And when you consider, again, 1981 New York, these sort of things were going on. And I'm not entirely sure, somebody can fact check me on this, but during that 1981, I think that was that not around the time period, or was Goodfellas earlier? I forget if Goodfellas was in the 70s into the early 80s, but because there was the
right on the cusp.
Yeah. So proving a point that it was a very violent year. But it was a very well done scene, because you had your two hijackers who you thought were going to be like ruthless, and they're just as like, what are you shooting at us for?
Yeah. Goodfellas, the movie itself, came out in 1990.
The movie, I was just trying to place what time period. I always forget if it was like late 70s or 81.
And one of the most interesting facts about it to me in terms of the movie was the politics involved. Yes, in a business sense, but also the whole shift between him and Lawrence. You know what I mean? Where it was like, and because they were both brutally upfront with each other, they held nothing back. Yet and again, to that point, nothing personal. I understand it. You got your job to do.
Right.
But my business is clean.
Yeah.
And all these different things. So I enjoyed that a lot. But to the same token, I mean, we found out Anna's true colors, played by Jessica Chastain, because the first thing he goes, we might, on Monday we'll get some things. Well, is it bad? Well, are we doing good? Practicing standard business practices.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What does that mean? Tell me. And she, I mean, for better or worse, she's masterminding this in the worst of ways. Yeah,
but in the worst of ways, but in a way, what I love, again, another thing that I love about this movie is that you are giving glimpses of these people's background without showing their backgrounds necessarily catching up to them. So we know that the Jessica Chastain is Anna. We know that her character has ties to the mob. Some type of gangster. Her dad is somebody of influence within the gangster world that she could call up at any time and smooth all this thing out with just a phone call away.
That's what I was expecting in the movie.
That was, and I was expecting that too. I don't know about you, Phil, but that was hinted. So you knew instantly, or you knew that she had these ties, that she could help out her husband, and that she's familiar with that world. And what she ends up doing, well, number one, to me, it came as a twist. But when she explained everything, you're like, well, of course. A woman who is brought up that way and has seen her father do, that is the way that she would rationalize and work things out. Not the right way, but in a way of protection, because that's the world in which she had grown up at, and her business sense says, you know what? I got to protect my husband and my family. I know that this is the wrong way to do it, but this is what I know, and this is what I know that works to do it the best. And yeah.
It's also her character. I was more, as an audience member, I was more afraid of what her character was going to do in the story, and how she plays in trying to get this business going. Because we see little scenes here and there where just her character is the bigger person in the situation. Like, for example, when they hit the deer, and she's the one who gets the gun, the most violent object in the car, and just straight up shoots it.
Right.
And because Abel couldn't. So that was like, okay, she's that kind of person who will just do anything to get it done fast, despite how much violence or whatever it takes.
Yeah.
And then also when the police are going through their house, with
Great
that search
scene.
warrant, she's the one who talks to Lawrence, be like, and giving the threat, not Abel. So it's just like, don't mess with her.
Yeah.
And that's what I liked about like going against female stereotypes and whatnot. That I found her more scarier than Abel.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And again, strong role for a woman. She was great at it. She embodied it. She took it in. She really studied.
Did she appreciate that he was trying to better her? I mean, speaking of, yes, she had more tenacity and shot the deer, but immediately after he says, this is what whores use. And she almost slaps him.
Well, and I would, that was a harsh line.
She did slap him at one point.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say this. I think for Abel's character, I thought that was over the line. I mean, I'm not, and again, not that her methods were the correct methods, but she was the one that was pushing back to all this. Abel was trying to swim upstream, so to speak, in a world that, in the end, wasn't going to allow him to be 100% on, 100% straight. There had to be give and take. By having his wife there, Anna, she was just that embodiment of, I understand, you just have to be stronger. I think she appreciated everything that Abel was trying to do and accomplish. And she was even offering the help to do that. But she sort of kind of, okay, hon, I understand what you want to do. I support you in what you want to do. I'm here if you need it. But there are going to be times where I'm not going to sit around and let your wishy-washiness affect my family. The scene with the gun, where that thug breaks into the house, and he leaves the gun, and she goes nuts. She's like, this is what happens when you try to be nice. There's your daughter has a loaded gun with the safety off. Like, she goes, she's just trying to get him stronger. And I think she really does love Abel. And the way I looked at this movie too was, Abel for her was that opposite, that opposites attract. She looked at him as
they were good balance.
They
and
were
foil.
Great balance and foil for one another, and she appreciated his doing what he wanted to do and doing it morally and trying to do it correct. She's just that person that says sometimes it doesn't work all the time. So I thought they were really good for each other, and in the end, they remained together, and they are good for each other. So yeah, she was great.
Absolutely, and I guess we can kind of talk about the last scene. Although I was going to hold off for a little bit, but it kind of ties in nicely. He has that great line about the hardest thing you'll ever do in your life is look a man in the eyes and tell him the truth, right? And that was, for me, what ended up saving the day, so to speak, because in that moment, Anna was so scared, and she was running back, and she didn't know what to do, and because she doesn't know Julian, all she sees is here's a guy with a gun, and the lawyer was scared, and he finally steps up and says, "No, don't do it," and he told the truth of like, "Hey, will you take care of my family?" Yeah, and that was it for Julian.
Yeah.
But in self-preservation, he was able to save his wife.
Yep.
And everybody else.
Yep. And the other person that was sort of kind of forgetting about another good turn at an independent, at one of these small independent films is Albert Brooks as Abel's lawyer, confidant, financier, so to speak. I thought he did a really good job. Again, not as imposing as he was in, say, Drive, in which Oscar Isaacs was also in. Mm-hmm. But he did a very good turn for him. This definitely is a movie of good performance. And regardless of a slow burn. And, I just wish Oscar Isaacs was getting a little more attention. But Jessica Chastain, I think when we talk about movies all the time and women and their roles, this is a great role for a woman, I think. I think that this is solid, strong. She's a strong character, regardless of whether she's good or bad. It's a very good, strong character part. And
her saying like, "Would you think this was luck?"
Yeah, right. Yeah, and that character knows. She knows the playing board, and she knows the rules of the game, so to speak. And it's just a matter of trying to get her husband to edge him along to say, "Hey, this is what it's going to take."
And I like her character, how Jessica Chastain actually approached her character. She said she had Dick Cheney inspirations, the politician who will do anything it takes to, get the job done. And then also her wardrobe. She talked about what she wore in the movie. She said Armani. It was all Armani.
It was all vintage Armani.
In that time, in 1981, that was when Armani was growing and emerging. So she felt like someone who is a business wife, really, and comes from money and wealth and whatnot, can show off that they are successful, wears Armani, has a luxurious life in that way. And then her blonde hair, that she found a lot of women who were wealthy back in that time dyed their hair blonde. Yeah. So it really added to not so much the femme fatale kind of character, but really just such a presence, visual presence on screen. Yeah.
And I want to go back quickly to Phil. You talked about the politics in the movie, and there were like two kinds of politics going on here. We had the governmental politics, and then we had the gangster politics happening. And I thought that the way that they clashed, but at the same time, they were just as corrupt. Like the government politics was just as corrupt as the gangster politics were. And I found that to be a very fascinating dichotomy taking place in this movie. And again, one of those things in which our character was just being sucked up in this tornado of just trying to do the good thing, and what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? And compromising, he even went to compromise his own business and his own dreams to make his dream happen. So in that realm as well, this movie is to be appreciated for. There's so much going on.
Let me ask you this. Again, I look at it, this defining convention, but right off the bat, we're told, okay, you got 30 days to close.
Yep.
And it's a ticking time bomb, but in the worst of ways, because the more it's too much time. Had this been a week, it would almost be better, because so much happens that just keeps messing this up.
Yeah.
That had it been a couple of days, he might have closed.
Right.
And so that, to me, again, just reversing how things are normally done, because it's like, oh my God, I gotta find,
Right.
Towards the end, yes, when he had the 3-day extension, that's when it became an actual ticking time bomb of like, I gotta get this money because I have no other options.
Yeah.
But early on, again, with the whole, the union trying to get the permits and dealing with the lawyers and having the indictments and three major counts.
Right.
That's the more it opened up, the worse it got.
And then everything happened with what was it? Oh, Julian. You know, what happened with him didn't help his because it was his trucking company in which a driver was armed and started a shootout on a freeway. That dug him into the hole, and he couldn't
But even
find
like
this
Julian's character
Right.
looked guilty
Yeah,
in all this
absolutely.
accounts, and just like, yeah, that's the type of business he's running.
Yeah.
He has guilty employees.
Yeah, and Julian was a character that just made wrong decisions every step of the way. Where had he not, like this, it could have been. But everything that character did, after the first hijacking or truckjacking, became like he just made wrong decisions that jeopardized this deal going down. And as you said, he kept on getting marred and just getting crap piled upon him, and he was just sinking in quicksand. Everybody was backing out. And
What do you guys find the line at the end by Julian, like, here you got everything you wanted? Do you guys, like, how do you guys take that?
I think it was hard hitting, but also once you watch the whole movie, it's like, do you know how much Abel went through to get everything he wanted? All the people, and also like his moral grounds that Abel built his business upon. I was like, he's doing it for the right reasons. Julian did everything he did for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
And that line that he said didn't bother me, because I know how much, like, Abel came from a good place, and Julian didn't. So I was like, well, yeah, because good people get good things in the end, and bad people get bad things in the end.
And I guess that this will tie in later on, is he good or bad? But yes, I think it's a great line, because in the end, yes, Abel gets what he wanted, but not without the blood, sweat, and tears, the aggravation, the frustration, and the fear of danger, the fear of violence that could happen to him, that could happen to anyone of his family, and then having to deal with the violence of politics and government. So he had to go through a lot, where everything at the beginning at least looked like, hey, this is all going to happen. And then it was like, no, this ain't going to happen. What do I have to do? So I just found that everything, like his trials and tribulations to get everything that he wanted, was it worth it in the end? Because we don't see him rise to that oil czar that he wanted to be. We just know that he got everything that he wanted. But how else is the history of violence in New York City and the gangster and the mobs? How will that affect him in the future? We don't see what becomes of the Standard Oiling Company. So I find that very interesting too.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other story points you guys want to talk about before we kind of dive into more of the production aspects of things?
Well, I just have to mention all the characters. I mean, we've had a lot of certain people that we saw Abel interact with, but I really liked how, it also adds to the mystery of everything that's going on. How, again, that you couldn't trust anybody.
Oh, yeah.
Because everyone didn't seem genuine. They seemed like they come from a darker side. Like, I know you have ties to my finances and whatnot. Right. Who's stealing from me? It could have been anyone. And then even the fact that the audience find out his own wife was technically stealing from him. So it's like, who can you trust? Right. And that's what really added to the frustration. Yeah. Along with the slow burn. I'm like, okay, I can't trust anyone other than Abel, because we know he's the protagonist of the story. Yeah, and again, there was a great scene. Well, there was that great scene when he shows up to the quote unquote meeting. And I don't know if it was me, and I saw the movie a little while ago, but it didn't appear as if he was necessarily invited to this meeting. Mm-hmm. Of the oil kings, so to speak. But he sort of crashed this party, and he's like, look, I know it's one of you people. Don't do this. Like, this is wrong. Like, don't do this. And they're all like playing, we'll do what? We're not involved with this. And the one guy that he thinks might be his friend, Peter, who has the tennis, he's the guy that has the tennis court. Even, again, you can't trust anybody, because that guy was as much a dick as all those other people. He just hit it better. Where there are other people who were just like, you're not, we don't want you, like, we don't need you in this business. Like, there's enough going on. And they knew that him coming into this business was going to rattle them.
and they were going to be out of business, as Abel says to people later on. He goes, yeah, my whole goal was like, you have 3 months left. You're done. You're done here, because I know how to do business, and I'm going to do it the right way.
I'm going to do it better than all of you.
Yeah, and he knew that, and all those other people, that brought fear into, because their livelihood's going to go. So how do we stop?
Yeah.
I liked how Peter's colors eventually showed.
Yeah.
though.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
You know, you get into my business and all this, and I didn't say
Exactly.
anything.
And the thing with Peter, because like for that short scene we first got introduced to him, I mean, we kind of understand he started in a rough place too, but eventually he got his business off the ground, and now he's living a luxurious life. So it's also that added question, like, what did he do?
Right.
Did he do good or bad decisions to build his company? And now that Abel's trying to do the same thing, you know, it's just like, okay, Peter might have done things in the corrupt way.
Right.
I think it's obvious that Peter, just by the way he says, like, hey, you build a fortress,
Yeah.
and you know those
Anyway.
guards, when they let you in, they don't let other people in.
Yeah.
And so that was very telling. Like, you don't put up that, you don't build a fortress
Right.
when you got nothing to hide.
Yeah. And you got the sense that was sort of kind of in his family's history,
Yeah.
too. So he was, again, another fascinating character to look at, and that J.C. Chandor got to play around with.
Absolutely.
So,
I mean, I found them all very interesting. To me, I did find Albert Brooks great, because even at the end, you know, did you know about the money? Yeah, I did. I just couldn't tell you.
yeah.
And of course the DA for me, he really was something.
Yeah, the DA was another interesting character as well, because we're talking Lawrence here, correct?
Absolutely.
Right? And Lawrence, he sort of kind of knew that he knew of Abel had passed, but he also knew that he was trying to do this legitimately. But he also knew that he had his job to do, and that doing his job was going to further his career, and he just had to come down on it. But I think that's why I love the scene between Anna and Lawrence, because Anna was like, look, you're picking on the wrong guy. And she defended her husband and the business. And he's like, yeah, I'm just doing my job, you know? And,
Very disrespectful.
yeah.
But
I love that.
Very disrespectful.
So good.
It was
Throws the
great.
cigarette at
Yep.
her.
It's great. It's a great scene. And then at the end, you know, now Lawrence becomes an ally, so to speak, right? After all that. So, because he realized,
Just
he's
doing my
just,
job.
and plus he's siding with the winner.
Yeah.
You know, he knows where his bread is buttered, and he's like, well, I can't side with you because I don't know where you're going to fall out in all this. These people, oh, well, you're coming out on top. So, hey, I'm going to be friends with you. It's all about the politics.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the other point for me, story-wise, it was really great how, you know, it tied in these things right there at the barbershop, and it kind of, it all sort of, in one way, shape, or form, ends at the barbershop. Because it's like, hey, I know you took my... And instead of putting him in a corner and saying, hey, I this is X amount of money, because I was almost surprised. I was like, you only need $200,000 or whatever it is. That's all you're going to get. But again, sticking to the fact that that's all what was taken from him, and he's not going to ask for anything more than that.
Right.
Because he could.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's not going to go to anyone else to force that money back
Yeah.
from him. It's like, yeah, and I liked how his character gave him a good allotted time to properly give him the money back.
Yeah.
Because, again, the higher ground, like, yes, I'm going to allow you to repay me.
Yeah, and you know, in a sense, I don't know if anybody else thought about this, but it sort of kind of reminded me of Michael Corleone in Godfather 3, where he was so hard trying to do the right thing, and just when I thought it was out there pulling me back in, he was a guy that was Abel was a guy that was constantly being pulled in by the riptide, and he was just literally swimming upstream just to try to keep his head up above the water and not go back to whatever history he may have had as a Colombian, and he just wanted to do the right thing for his family, for his kids, and do everything the right way.
Even his employees. I mean, when he
Sure.
talked to Julian's wife and then saying, like, I'm going to protect you. It's like, just do the right thing and I will do the right thing by helping you.
Yeah.
It's like, go about the moral sense.
Even talking to his salespeople, that reminded me of a thing from a great little Barry Levinson film called Tin Man, where they were aluminum siding salesmen. But his Abel's speech to his men about how to conduct the sale. I mean, Oscar Isaac's again. I was just like, okay, that's what I'll do. I felt like I was learning. I felt like I was part of that speech. That's how I think solid he was. But he believed in it himself. And when you have a character that has that much belief in what he's doing and that he's doing it the right way, it permeates through. So that, I thought, made it so tragic when things just started befalling him and like thwarting him at every turn. You couldn't help but feel like, oh, good God. You need help, man.
Absolutely. And ultimately what see, this is kind of giving away my judgment, but I feel like I have to say it now because now's a great place. Unlike in Unforgiven, right, for anyone who's seen that movie, and hopefully this is not a spoiler, so tune out for 30 seconds if you don't want to know this. There, he goes from saying like, hey, I don't do that stuff anymore, I'm a good guy, etc., and at the end, it all just goes to waste, and he's like, yeah, I'm William Money, and I kill women and children, and yeah, but you shouldn't unarm guy. Well, he should have armed himself.
Yep. And
so, unlike that, Abel, he just kind of accepted the things going around him, and in this, the most prime example of his wife.
Sure.
And you know what? The things that are happening in my world, I just got to be a part of it and just accept them.
Yes.
So he never did them, but he has to accept them. And that's the difference between Unforgiven and this.
Yeah. Yeah. In Will Money, it's a great comparison when you think about it. With the exception, I think there was more history given to Will Money's backstory as to who he was, where we really don't know too much about Abel's backstory, other than the fact that he at some point, participated in a very violent year or years, and he just wanted to get out. And yes, his acceptance of, this is the world I'm in. I'm going to do my best to be I'm going to be the upright, upstanding citizen here. But I know that I'm going to have to do things only because it's the world that I'm in to protect my world. I might have to do some shady things, and I'll let some of it creep in. I have a loving wife, and these are the things I have to accept in order for me to survive and succeed.
Yeah, and it's also the added element that he himself is an immigrant, so people are automatically going to be against him,
right,
in everything he does. So he always has that constant battle against the community and society, which I really applaud his character for. Is like, okay, he's really going the moral ground and being clean and constantly proving that he's doing the right thing and building a company in the right way.
Yeah, but in the end, he still has to accept his wife's help in that area, which he did, because doing the right thing was literally sinking him. Yeah. He was going to be bankrupt. He was giving away the farm, to get money. He was giving away a percentage of his oil storage facilities, and so yeah, it's very like I said, that's one of the things that I really appreciated about this movie, is because you really felt that in the end, as slow as it may have been, I felt that it's deliberately paced. I really felt that I got to know these characters and their inner demons, and I just love the relationships going on. So I think J.C. Chandor, who also I believe wrote this story as well, did a fantastic job putting this movie together, especially coming off of All Is Lost.
Yeah. And he did it pretty quick. I mean, it was reported by Deadline that it was springtime, late springtime 2013 that he was writing it. So how far along, we don't quite know, but sure. And then we're shooting in January 2014, and technically it came out towards the end of 2014. Mm-hmm. So that's a pretty fast turnaround time, considering, and they put out a good product overall.
They did. He put out a really strong product, and I think it was because, at least for everything that I'm reading, his previous two movies, so we had Margin Call and All Is Lost, really led to him making this movie. I know he's been said to say that All Is Lost was perhaps his most difficult movie that he's ever made. He will never do anything of that again. And again, you can see all is lost, and you can see the hurdles that one would have to go through in order to accomplish that film. And for A Most Violent Year, I found it very interesting that of all things that ended up, he wanted to make a character study he wanted to do this thing about a guy, and he just couldn't figure out the right way. And then sadly, tragically, it was the Sandy Hook tragedy that inspired him to get writing about this, because he was driving his daughter to school when Sandy Hook had happened, and it's literally apparently 2 towns away from where he lives. So it affected him like really deeply, because he has a daughter. It was such a horrible act of violence, and how does one get around that? How does one escape that sort of thing? This is 2 towns over. And and then when you look at 9/11, which he's a New Yorker, obviously, so it's reaction, then you get it's an action, then there was a reaction. How do you cope with this? And for him, it was about this is where I can go and start my research. And when he looked up, he was like going, well, how violent is New York? And he came upon 1981, and he's like, this is the most violent year. Okay, how does a guy who wants to be good moral standards, how does somebody survive in this world? And that's how he gets inspired, and he begins writing this movie, which I think is pretty fascinating. I mean, it came from his inner thing of what he wanted to do. And he ended up writing, for the most part, I think, a pretty strong script. Good screen story from that one tragedy. Absolutely.
And I couldn't find, but he doesn't have a history with oil in anything.
No.
I mean, because it's very factual, at least from what it seems, factually told.
Yeah, it's factually told in the fact that it's an infactual movie. I mean, these characters don't exist. And he just picked upon something and was like, oh, the oil industry. Well, why couldn't this be part of this? I mean, there were truck jackings. And again, I go back to Goodfellas, because that had one of the biggest truck jackings from LaGuardia, I think it was. And so this was going on, and when you have a man who's trying to do something within the oil company, listen, whenever we see a gangster movie, they're either in the construction business, the pizza business, it becomes almost stereotypical, regardless of how true it is regarding that particular mobster. So doing something that I'm unfamiliar with opens up a whole new world to me, and that's one of the assets I love. And it didn't just stay that.
There was the goal that, we don't know what it is initially, but these, and when he's having the dinner with his bankers, and he explains, this will allow me to control my fate. And obviously there's actual logic behind it, and he gets into all the terms of why that is. Okay, wow, this is, the research and background behind, there's a lot of thought given into it.
Yeah, I think so too. And again, you could take it as based on a true story. Like, at the end, if you didn't know any better, you go, wow, did that really happen? And it didn't, but the way in which it was told and shot, I thought it was great, wonderfully shot as well, because it lent to that realism, and it captured that cold gray in the winter. That's how you can get New York, or any big city that has a winter like that. But when there's corruption, it was always gray. There was very little sunlight to be had.
Yeah, and even Bradford Young, who did the cinematography, just coming off Selma, which was such a great movie. We just discussed that as well. But he really wanted to display the decaying, deteriorating aspect of New York. And when he read the script, he immediately thought, this is a widescreen type of film. Like, every shot, you're going to just see the landscape of New York. Like, really get into that environment, and just like how run down and how corrupt and how everything was just literally, falling apart. And I feel like they really showed so many different aspects of New York, especially when Abel was chasing down the driver, and we see them go through like train stations and whatnot, and I was like, wow, that you feel like you're all over New York, and I really like that. Yeah,
I did too, and I like that they chose locations in New York, because in that year too, all of New York was pretty much people, it was like a cesspool. Like you wouldn't want to necessarily go to Broadway or Times Square because there were bad elements all over. But they sort of kind of, they stayed away from what we know of New York City. That is now New York City is one of the safest places to be. You know, there's still violence there's still crime, but it literally is one of the safest places and like a destination city to go to, where they did show us another facet of New York, and they showed us different locations that I had not seen before.
And I
love
like
that.
they called to it at the end when Andrew Walsh says, "Oh, I didn't even realize it's not a view," and it almost became the joke of that's why I bought it.
That's why, yep.
You know,
Yeah.
Because you see the city,
Yeah.
and you see
the skyline there.
Yeah, so they really did they did a number.
Yeah, and
broad scope.
Yeah, and going to that truck chase, that to me was one of the scenes where I was like, okay, really? You're gonna, wow. I mean, it was very French Connection-ish to me. Even in the way that it was edited, and the pacing of that truck chase, I just wasn't necessarily buying that. He is a man that would go to all ends, but that it's like, really, why don't you just call the cops? Like, you have them, just call the cops. But again, now that I think of it, this is not a day of cell phones. You can't easily stop the car and go to a
it's not a day of cell phones. Plus, you know, at the end of the day, he wants a greater thing, right? So he's they caught on to him pretty quickly, but he was going to chase him until he got to the real distributor. Mm-hmm. You know, because they were going to take it to as he explained in the meeting, some small time person was going to sell it off to the big players, and so that's what he was after. And so that's why even if he could get the cops involved, I don't think he would have made that choice. So.
Yeah, and even to the point where at the end of that chase scene, he's beating up the guy, like, again, still making the good, taking the higher road and letting the guy go. It's like, yes, he is a clean guy.
He does his best, yes. And
he might have to get violent a little bit, but he won't kill anybody or like do something that extreme just for his business.
And, you know, it's funny, we can talk about that too, because Chandor has said that to an extent he made this film in a response to violent films, to violent movies, and he didn't want this to be a bloodlust kind of a movie. He didn't want to exploit the violence, or you know, he's familiar with gangster movies, both great and the not so good ones. And he didn't want to focus on the violence other than the year. Like, and again, I think the title is conceiving, and for anybody who won't read or won't read up about the movie, they will think it's going to be a violent gangster movie, right?
And even the trailer, because I understand
the way the trailer's cut. Mm-hmm.
You have to market a certain way, and so if you're marketing it, okay, you ask, what are people most familiar with? You can't shift that in a trailer and then expect people to come, but get them to come, and then they might appreciate it.
But get them to come, and maybe if somebody asks you, hey, what about this movie, A Most Violent Year? Think of the title as its setting, which is, mm-hmm. I mean, and that's basically it. A Most Violent Year is the setting of this movie, and while there is the threat of violence throughout, it's not necessarily a violent movie, and it is a gangster movie in a sense, but not in the typical way that we like through the Martin Scorsese's. Not that there's, or the Francis Ford Coppola's. I
like that. Like it's the irony that's laid throughout the whole film, because even going to Scarface, the popular line, say hello to my little friend, and you see the guns, like violence. And then in this movie, it's like guns are not the case. Like they're completely against guns. So it's just like all these things that you think are going to be in this type of film, of a gangster film and whatnot, it's not what you believe it is.
Right.
I mean, to so much, I think on less than 5 fingers you can count the number of times it was a bullet was shot.
Right.
To my knowledge, maybe 6, 7, if you want to get real technical. But certainly in the shootout with the truck, Anna killing the deer, and that was so hard hitting because of how they sound effect wise, how they played it. Right, it was perfect. You're seeing it from basically the view of the character. You don't know that she's coming up on it, and she just shoots, and you're like, has she? What just happened?
Yeah.
And then right at the end, the most hard hitting one that kills. That's just all the violence he really needed was just Julian.
Right
at the end, because you see the blood. It's a terrible way to.
And that was self-imposed as well, because the first shot with the deer, that was against an animal. It wasn't against a human.
Right.
And then it's like everyone's their own worst enemy.
And again, I go back to how it used the threat of violence, because his house was invaded by some thugs who had guns. So there was a threat of violence there, because they could have been shot. He chases them out. One of them leaves the gun behind. So in another scene shortly following this one, we see his little girl pick up the gun. And I don't know about you, but I mean, dread just filled me going, oh no, this is not going to end well. And Anna comes home to save the day, but she, gives Abel a talking to, going, yeah, well, what about your daughter carrying a loaded gun with the safety off? And you realize the potential as to how bad that could have gone. Any one of these gangsters. How about the scene in which the two salespeople doing their job, seeming like they could get the sale done, and when they say, hey, let's go draft up the papers inside the house, they go to leave the garage, and bam, gets knocked out. They get tied up, thrown into the back of that dump truck, and left. I mean, again, there's the threat of violence that just permeated that business, where all is corrupt around you, no matter what. No matter how good you try to be, and they quit. And these are just all these things piling on Abel, just chipping away at him trying to achieve his goal.
And that was, with the salesman, I don't actually know his name, but because Julian's whole goal was to be a salesman so he can get out of the violence.
Yeah.
Violence is there whether you want, whether you're a truck driver or in sales. It doesn't matter at this point.
Yep.
And so I thought that was really effective. I do want to talk about the praise for this movie, because there's everyone, for the most part, critic-wise, agrees. And I think they agree with us. A lot of Variety wrote maybe slow, but it's never dull. Overall rating is very high. Rotten Tomatoes has it at 90%.
90%, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite amazing. What do you guys think of JC's been compared a lot to Sidney Lumet?
Yeah, I mean, Sidney Lumet, again, another character-driven director. And again, I think it was almost as if he took some of his favorite directors and tried to incorporate them into this type of a movie, because clearly there's some Sidney Lumet here. Clearly there's some William Friedkin going on here, and clearly a little bit of Scorsese, with all the oil bosses meeting, and he just made it his own. So when you look at some of the movies, well, the Network, some of the things that this guy's done, a lot of them are saying something about society, and a lot of them are about character. One of his last movies was that Vin Diesel movie. I see that you have his filmography up, but he did that Vin Diesel movie. I believe that was him, in which he was Vin Diesel was a mobster, he was a mobster who represented himself.
Find Me Guilty.
Find Me Guilty, and I thought it was called something else, but Find Me Guilty. He was a mobster who represented himself during a court case, and again, it's a pretty good movie. And Vin actually does a really good turn for himself in this movie, making a likable gangster, so to speak. And I do find that this movie is very character driven, and you find the foibles that happen are very humanistic. So yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that statement.
Yeah, I think it's the character flaws that really what people can relate to. Mm-hmm. And also, some people have a really hard time, like, trying to stay away from violence and whatnot, because sometimes, again, they have to get pulled in. So being that strong character who always chooses the higher road, I really liked how Chandor really is like every 10 minutes moral, like, no, I'm doing this instead. I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Which warrants, good decisions have good results in the end.
And Chandor himself didn't write this in he didn't write it in a stereotypical way, nor did he shoot it in such.
No.
So I appreciate that. It is very interesting. I mean, I talked at the top of the show about where I think, again, we are talking about it very lovingly, and it is a solid piece of work. But again, I think that A24, who I like as a whole, I think they're a really great indie distribution company out of New York City. I think they do a good job. I think they just might have bitten off a little bit more than they can chew, at this route, because look, the movie opened up December 31st, and it opened up okay. And when you look at the movies that opened up at Christmas time and what has already been out there, there's too much. There's just a lot out there, and a company, and I know, coming from a company like Lionsgate back in the day, like trying to release a Shadow of the Vampire or something to that extent, I understand working on a small budget. And at this point, A24 is very, very, like, they're in their early stages, and they're very independent, and trying to throw that kind of money around for marketing, you gotta be very grassroots. So you open up at 4 locations, and then it goes wide on January 30th. So you're basically looking at a month when it hits its widest release, which is 818 locations. And again, 818 locations.
Not a lot.
Back in 75, that would be considered like a very wide release, even going into the 80s if you got close to 1,000. But in today, that 818, under 1,000, it's like limited wide. But we are looking at, like, their opening limited weekend. They were opened up 4 theaters. They had a $43,197 average. Now, I think upon its release, too, was the National Board of Review. They had great reviews in which they were pushing. So when you open up to crowds like New York, and this is a very New York movie, right? And I believe they may have won the New York Critics Award, too. And then when you open up to L.A., in those aspects, you have some discerning audience members who are going to go to this movie in its limited release. And right now, the movie, its widest released, 818 theaters, they've an estimated $3 million, which isn't bad. I mean, A24, I think, would have to look at this as good for them. Yeah. Again, I think that they may have been better suited to open up after this. Open up in February, open up in March, or maybe at the end of January, where you can maybe build a little bit more. I think, unfortunately, it got a little bit lost. I don't think they had a great release date, and I think it's sort of lost for them, because I do think it's a solid film, and anybody who sees it of that older audience is going to appreciate it. They're just not going to take the time because of the other movies. I
think their release date really hindered them in a way, because it could have helped or hindered, and unfortunately for them, I felt like it hindered, because setting it at like December 31st, that's still early enough for Oscar talks, for award season, and like making that last minute push. But unfortunately, they didn't get that. Yeah. And I understand why they released it then in order to do that, but it didn't.
And do you think it could have been a little bit better had they even taken more time to tighten things?
Tighten things in the movie?
Yeah, and I don't think not that for me it didn't go long, right?
No.
I don't think it suffers from any of that, but I feel like just in general, the more time you have, the better you can potentially make something.
No, I mean, I think they made the best movie that they've made, and I don't think at this point, any tweaks could make it any better than it is. I think it's a really very good character study. I just think that it got lost in this Academy shuffle, and it's tough when you are a small company trying to get a movie out there, and you're competing with the Weinsteins and the Imitation Games and the Focuses of the world and whatnot, and Warner Brothers with American Sniper. It's just hard. It's just tough, no matter how good your movie is. And then it comes down to, you start hearing praise for a movie and Jessica Chastain getting a Golden Globe nomination, and you're like, who the hell saw this movie enough to get her? Like, how does this happen? I've never heard of this movie yet. I haven't heard, and that to me is like sort of kind of tough. I mean, it gives the movie some credence and a little bit of publicity, but when all is said and done, it gets dwarfed.
Enough.
It wasn't enough. And there was still I'm sure there were still people out there who would go, oh, well, Jessica Chastain just got nominated for a Golden Globe for, Most Violent Year. And people would be, what the hell's that? I didn't even know that there was a movie.
And I think it's also that, like, we had their earlier film festival that it was successful at. And then if you think about Oscar Isaacs, at this time last year, he was being really recognized for Inside Llewyn Davis. So, like, they're kind of riding off of, like, already being nominated and being in that spotlight frame that they're so, like, just a year ago they were in. So, like, everyone knows them.
Right.
But this movie itself didn't really stand alone.
Yeah. So
they had the names, but that's it.
Yeah, and it's again, it's just very tough. And when you look at a movie and a movie like How All Is Lost, like that came out at a really good time. It really didn't get lost in the shuffle. They did a good job promoting it. You had Robert Redford in there, and that wasn't really forgotten, so to speak, in like during certain awards and things like that. Had they tried to follow that, they may have. Maybe they could have hedged a little more money out of it. I just don't know. I don't think it'll reach $10 million. It's just going to be interesting to see where it caps out. So
I think if this, I mean, I can understand they're trying to push for nominations, but the only nominations it potentially could have had was just for the acting.
Do you have, speaking of acting, who was the gentleman? There was another actor that they had outside of Oscar Isaacs was supposed to play Abel.
Javier Bardem. Who, it was originally casted, but dropped out because him and J.C. Chandor, they couldn't have agreement of where they wanted to take Abel's character.
Right.
And if you think about Javier, he won an Academy Award for No Country for Old Men.
Sure.
And just thinking his character in that movie, so violent, who shoots people right point blank, and then to bring that kind of carry that characteristic over to this film, it wouldn't really add up to what Abel turned out to be, being that moral ground. So I understand. I mean, Javier Bardem, he's an amazing actor.
Yeah.
But I think he would have brought that more violent aspect to this kind of character that was more supposed to be non-violent character.
Yeah, I mean, he could have. I mean, he definitely had a turn in the counselor. I mean, I think Javier Bardem could have played this character. I just find it interesting that it was Jessica Chastain who recommended to J.C. Chandor once Javier brought. He goes, "Hey, I went to acting school with this guy.
Julian.
He's great, yeah, and." You should check him out. And J.C. Chandor is like, "Yep, already been starting to look at him." And so it was like this three-way. Yeah, and so it is, and actually it speaks to Jessica Chastain, I think, as well. And Oscar Isaacs is like, oh my God, this is just such a treat. I mean, and they had a simpatico with each other. And you can, knowing the background that they went to acting school together, there was a comfort level with them that you actually did feel like they were this loving couple. And, I don't have any behind the scenes.
There's a genuine relationship there.
Yeah. And it seems like it made this comfort level in making this movie believable. And I thought, together, I thought they were great.
Absolutely.
I thought they were really, really great together.
All right. The question that everyone's been waiting for, hopefully. It's time to cast judgment. Is he a good guy or is he a bad guy?
Is Abel a good guy?
Yeah. Ultimately.
Okay, I'm gonna say yes, only because we see everything he goes through. It's more of a emotional battle, an emotional struggle with everyone he's dealing with. Again, always choosing the high ground, letting people go, and despite all the wrongs that they've done unto him, and even trying to help Julian, who chose all the wrong things. Like, he genuinely is a good guy, and he got what he wanted in the end because he worked for it. And then also, if you're gonna, I always have to throw somewhat of a religious aspect into it. Cain and Abel, and Abel is the good guy. He's the one who was done wrong. He was killed by Cain. So like that religious aspect and symbolism that Abel is a good person with high moral grounds. So yes, he's good.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately he is a good guy in a corrupt world. Playing off the name, I mean, the character's full name is Abel Morales. So, it's pretty much right in front of your face. What's great about this movie is how it hints to people's backgrounds. And it appears as if his background may have been tainted with some violence and corruption, and he wanted to do everything the right way. And this movie is a struggle to be moral. It wasn't just an external. I mean, there was a lot of internal fighting going on with him because he could have taken that route. He at least the way I viewed the movie is he could have taken a threatening, violent route. He had the option with his wife, and I think himself, he could have done it as well. But he chose to try not to do it. And I think in the end, he had to compromise his morals to an extent, but not so much in which it would make him a bad man. I think ultimately, Abel Morales is a moral figure, and I think that he is a good guy. He's trying to do good in a corrupt world. And in the end, I think he succeeds in being that good guy, and he will treat his employees and his family well and keep them all safe and protected going forward.
And I also do find it interesting. I forget who he had the speech with, but he says, you can't, and I think it was with Julian. I just don't know which part of the movie per se. All you can do is look forward. You just got to look forward. Why are you looking back or whatever, And so I think you're 100% right. I think there's the person's history who we know the least of is his. Mm-hmm. And that's where this gets tough. It's because does he have a history of violence or not? And, I would argue that yes, he does, because, this isn't like when we were truck drivers and things like that. Right. And so I think him as a driver was completely different, and he is trying to atone. But at the same time, I think he has to accept that he's built his empire, on his past actions, and he's going to have to live with that. And so I don't think he's 100% clean. But
right.
The good news is there's much worse people than him.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So anything else you guys want to talk about before we head on out?
I just, the music a little bit, the composer Alex Ebert, I'm not really familiar with his work, but I felt being a slower paced film, I could really feel it here and there as transitions, and especially the chasing scene.
Absolutely.
And I also just like the sound editing in and of itself, because not a lot happened, and we didn't need a lot of music to really elevate whatever the emotion the audience was supposed to feel. Mm-hmm. But I really enjoyed it.
Right. No, I did too. We were talking about the drive connection between Albert Brooks. This is just silly trivia. The drive, Albert Brooks and Oscar Isaacs were both in what I think it's a great movie, Drive. So his company is Standard Oil. In Drive, his character name is Standard. So, and there's a scene where Isaac is stood atop one of his trucks with Standard emblazoned in huge writing beneath him. So, whether that was done, if that was pure coincidence, that's funny. If it wasn't, it's still funny.
Or just an ode to his past work.
Yeah. And I've become a fan of Oscar Isaacs. I think I noticed him, and it's a guilty pleasure movie. Please don't misunderstand. I don't think this is a great movie. Not up for any awards. Some people would probably put it in the Razzie category. It's in my guilty pleasure category, and it's a movie that had Oscar Isaacs in it. And that movie was Sucker Punch by Zack Snyder.
Mm-hmm. Right.
The movie is all over the place. I think it has some great imagery, but I think it also has an amazing performance by Oscar Isaacs, and he sings in the movie. He was the gangster. He was the bad guy in this movie. And he was great. I thought he was, and I'm like, who is this guy? Because he has a charisma, and he was just so good in that movie. Like, go back and rewatch it if you can or if you dare. But I'm telling you, you will look at Oscar Isaacs and you'll figure out why he got chosen for inside Llewyn Davis and how he gets picked for these. And I'm glad to see his career flourishing because, he's going to be in Star Wars, in the Star Wars movie, and he's going to become a geek.
People are going to know him.
Yep.
And and that's good. I mean, he's been at this for a while. I think he's a very talented guy, and I like it. I like seeing
came out on top, just
come
like
out on top. That's right, just like Abel Morales.
That's right. All right, guys. Thank you guys for joining us for yet another Anatomy of a Movie here on the Popcorn Talk Network. There we go. There's our nice music. Definitely. I like there's like that small little beat to it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed that quite a lot. Demetri, you have a Twitter.
I do have a Twitter. It's at DMovies1701. So at DMovies1701. Please follow me, tweet me, do whatever it is that people do on Twitter. I like to tweet out certain kinds of movie items that interest me, and I hope that they interest you as well. So check me out there, and always check me out at Anatomy of a Movie. One of my favorite things to do and talk about is movies. I hope you agree.
Yes.
Thanks.
And you can follow me on Twitter at Serafini TV. You can follow all of us here on Twitter at Movie Anatomy.
That's right. And The Popcorn Talk on Twitter. Go ahead, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Look up us on iTunes and, of course, Facebook, all that different stuff. And Demetri mentioned a guilty movie pleasure of his. We have a show called Guilty Movie Pleasure. We have a show called Meet the Movie Press. We have a DC movie news. We have a Marvel movie news. We have a Jedi Alliance, which is Star Wars news. We have so many different shows. We have a show for profiling people called Profiles with Malone and Mance. And soon we will be adding many, many more shows. One of them will be all about writers with John Comerford, who you guys hopefully know from our Anatomy of a Movie. So lots to look forward to. And hey, lots to look forward to just in our show because we've got lots of movies coming down the pipeline.
Yeah.
It's going to be a crazy year.
Turner Classic Movies are coming out this
I've already
February.
started. I've been watching Turner Classic Movies, Ode to Neil Simon, Frank Capra.
There you go. Lots to go over. So thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time on Anatomy of a Movie.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the rest of the Anatomy of a Movie staff, we would like to thank you for listening and subscribing to the show. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email or tweet us. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been Anatomy of a Movie.